For our Experts in Emotion interview, we have the honor of speaking with Dr. Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt is the Thomas Cooley Professor of Ethical Leadership at the NYU Stern School of Business. He received his BA from Yale University and PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, and also completed postdoctoral research at the University of Chicago. He was a professor at the University of Virginia from 1995 until 2011, when he joined the Stern School of Business at NYU. His research focuses on morality, its emotional foundations, cultural variations, and developmental course. He began his career first studying negative moral emotions, such as disgust, shame, and vengeance, but then later moved on to the understudied positive moral emotions, such as admiration, awe, and elevation. This work got him involved with the field of positive psychology, in which he's been a leading researcher. He's the co-developer of the Moral Foundations theory and of the research site yourmorals.org. He uses his research to help people understand and respect the moral motives of their enemies. He's won 3 teaching awards from the University of Virginia and 1 from the Governor of Virginia. He's spoken twice at the TED Conference, 1 on politics and 1 on religion. He's been named as a top 100 global thinker in 2012 by Foreign Policy magazine, and is the author of more than 90 academic articles and 2 books, including The Happiness Hypothesis, Finding Modern Truth in Ancient Wisdom, and The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. So I now turn to a very special Experts in Emotion interview with Dr. Jonathan Haidt on morality and emotion. So welcome, John. Thanks for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jen.
So I thought I might start by asking you a little bit about what first got you interested in emotion.
So I arrived at Penn in 1987, and I was going to study the psychology of humor, actually. I was going to be a cognitive psychologist and study humor. But I happened to have a chance conversation with John Barron, and he was interested in decision-making, including moral decision-making. And I thought that sounded interesting. I'd studied morality as an undergraduate at Yale in philosophy. And so I started studying morality, but moral psychology in 1987 meant Lawrence Kohlberg. It meant the study of moral reasoning. And I was interested in the phenomena, but it just was kind of boring. And it just felt like something was lacking, something was missing. And then when I started to read some anthropology, I took a course from Alan Fisk in cultural psychology. And, you know, it was like the scene in The Wizard of Oz where everything goes from black and white to color. And it was also exciting and interesting. And it really felt, it was like, you know, it was like a gut feel like, oh my God, this is it. This is really what makes things happen. I was reading about all these traditional societies that a lot of their morality was about food and sex and menstruation and handling of animals. And it was all this visceral stuff. What does this have to do with morality? But clearly the link was disgust or some visceral sense of responsiveness to things in the world. And Penn happened to have Paul Rozin on the faculty. I didn't go there to study morality or emotion or anything like that. But Penn happened to have all these great people interested in morality and emotion. So I worked with Paul Rozin to develop a scale to study disgust sensitivity. And that was just so much fun, both the emotion and working with Rozin, that I got really interested in disgust as this emotion, which is so based in the body and our corporeality, but that structures our religions, our highest aspirations, so much of our morality, really. So disgust was really my way in. I was studying morality, and luckily, I just fell into the study of disgust, and I'm still there.
One thing led to the next.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great. So I actually wanted to ask you some questions then about your work in this area. So I mean, you're widely known for your foundational work at the intersection of, moral psychology and emotion. And I wondered, as an expert in this field of moral emotions, if you might say, just at a basic level first, how do you exactly define what a moral emotion is?
Well, the worst way would be to say, what's our morality? And then what are the emotions that we want people to feel more of? And if you do that, you basically conclude, since almost everybody in the academic world is politically liberal, you conclude that the moral emotion is compassion, and that's the good emotion. We want to make everyone more compassionate. That's one way to do it. My approach has been from the beginning to look at morality across cultures, to look at just morality as something that humans do. Like we do cuisine, we do music, and it varies around the world. So what are all the emotions that can be involved in creating a moral order and enforcing it? I wrote a review paper in 2003 or so where I think I suggested that we can look at two features especially. Well, I can't find it, but I remember. It's disinterested elicitors. That is, as we all know, most emotions are about me. They're about, my projects, my goals. What do people think of me?
Right.
So we don't want to call all emotions moral emotions, but to the extent that we can feel strong emotions at what happens to someone else, at them being cheated or harmed or embarrassed or whatever, to the extent that the elicitors are disinterested, that is not about my own interests, that's one trait. And then you can also look at, pardon me, the extent to which the action tendency is pro-social. And by pro-social, I don't mean just helping people who are suffering. I mean supporting the moral order of the social order, which often can have a more conservative cast to it. Anything you do that extends yourself so that you're not just pursuing your interests, but you're trying to support morality or virtue outside of yourself. So if you plot those two features, some emotions are really high on both. And so moral elevation, righteous anger, these are things triggered by things that don't necessarily have anything to do with us, and they make us want to fix them. So those, I think, are really prototypical moral emotions. But anything can be a moral emotion. I mean, sadness. Actually, Schadenfreude is a really good example. Schadenfreude isn't just a selfish thing like, oh, he's got more than me and I want him to fail. Schadenfreude, or happiness at another's misfortune, is especially when people have been sort of pompous or arrogant, or you don't think they deserve what they have, and then you're happy when they lose it or are humiliated. Well, that's a disinterested elicitor to some extent, but it doesn't make you do anything that makes the world better. So that's like a non-prototypical moral emotion. I would count it as a moral emotion, but not as good as righteous anger or elevation or guilt or a few others that are really quintessentially, they do well on both of those criteria.
I was wondering, too, if you could say a little bit, I mean, you've talked about different kinds of moral emotions. How do you see them as being organized into what you've called different moral emotion families?
One thing I've learned in my 25 years in psychology is that Mother Nature or Father Evolution or whatever you want to call it doesn't give a damn about our categories and doesn't give a damn about parsimony. So I'm generally wary of attempts to systemize psychology too much. With that said, emotions are not necessarily natural kinds in the world. So the emotions that we label do tend to clump together. They're not sort of spread homogeneously over the potential space. So what I've done is think about them, especially in terms of what's their function. And so emotions that serve to sort of inhibit us or sort of monitor the fit of the social order with us and get us to conform. So, shame, embarrassment, guilt, those sort of fit together in a certain way. Those that respond to that make us judge others, other critical emotions. So, disgust, anger, and contempt. Paul Raza and I have looked at that triplet of emotions. There are emotions of sympathy, empathy, compassion. There's a small cluster there. Let's see, what else am I leaving? Oh, and then of course the other praising emotions. There's such a focus on the negative emotions. But the big idea that Marty Seligman had, I think, in positive psychology is that we as a field have focused too much on the negatives for a lot of reasons. Barbara Fredrickson's really critical 1999 article, I think it was, on what's good about emotions, what's good about positive emotions, helped us see that the negative emotions are more discrete. They're sort of easier to study. They're more ancient. There's sort of more of them are ancient mammal or vertebrate emotions, but the positives are sort of messier. And so that's where I've done both disgust and then sort of got, from looking at disgust, sort of the opposite of disgust is elevation, I believe. So that got me into looking at awe, elevation, feelings of just reactions to beauty and all that is good in the world. So those are the main families of social emotions. I mean, there are a lot of other emotions, but I'm interested as a social psychologist in the social emotions, and especially the ones that make us either try to rise to a higher moral standard or condemn others who aren't doing so, that sort of thing.
So actually, I wanted to ask you a little bit, since you did talk about your work in these sort of feelings of moral elevation, and I know you've done some work, as well as with Dacher Keltner, on this really mysterious and elusive emotion of awe.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit more about what are the core kind of features and sort of functional significance of this emotion that we all find enticing, but we don't completely understand what awe is.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
still is pretty elusive. Awe is
Yeah.
sort of like the biotech stock that everybody thinks is,
Yeah.
so important and going to be the wave of the future, and hasn't yet materialized. Let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So Dacker and Dacker was, I think, I can't remember. I think it was Dacker was commissioned to write an article on either
Mm-hmm.
on it or something. At any rate, we teamed up because we had similar interests, and there's basically no empirical research in psychology on awe. There's a couple of articles now in the last few years, but when we wrote this in 2003, 2004, something like that, we did a literature review, and the entire empirical corpus, if you look at PsycInfo, there are a bunch of theoretical articles from psychoanalysis and things like that. The only article that reported any data whatsoever was one psychoanalyst who reported dreams from 3 patients, including one that was about penis awe. That was it. That was all the data there was in the record.
Maybe that's the only kind of awe. Who knows?
That's, yeah, the only kind that they were interested in, I suppose. So
Yeah.
Dacker and I wrote this. I think I think it's a great review article. It was really fun to write. It's Dacker and I both like to read around other fields, and awe has been written so much about in religious studies, and the transcendent, and in aesthetics, a little bit in history, the early modern era. So there are some scholarly treatises on awe, but there's almost no data. And I set out to try to study it in my lab at UVA with a graduate student, Patrick Cedar, and we brought people into the lab. And the most tractable kind of awe is nature videos, which can be really awesome, really amazing. And we made some really good videos, I think, and we got a big screen and got people to watch them and rate them, and they said that they check, oh yes, awe, that's what I felt. But then we tried to see if it changed their thinking. Did it make them more creative? Did it help them see remote associations? Did it change their moral goals for their life? And we never really found anything. Now, we should have been a lot more persistent. We didn't, we did a few rounds, and then Patrick sort of lost interest and moved on to other things. So I do think that there is something there that the descriptions of it are so consistent. What's really intriguing to me about awe is that it seems to be sort of a cognitive emotion. In other words, it's very powerfully felt, but it doesn't make you want to do anything. What it seems to, so what Dacker and I concluded is that the 2 key features are vastness and need for accommodation. Something's really big and it doesn't fit into your existing mental structures. You have to change. You have to do something. And so awe paralyzes you, actually. You freeze. You don't want to run out and break something or hug someone. You just freeze, and you take in. And there are enough accounts of awe in history that a person experiencing awe changes allegiances. So Saul on the road to Damascus, the scales fall from his eyes, bright light, and he then becomes the devotee of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus. So we think that awe is like a reset button. It's like a reset button that opens up your cognitive constructs and makes you amenable to having a new identity, new goals, following a new leader. So demagogues know about awe. Hitler knew a lot about awe. So it's a very powerful emotion, at least in principle. It's hard to get it to work in the lab. Nature videos don't seem to do it too much. But if people are willing to try to study it in situ, go to evangelical churches and political rallies, I think we'll find that it has some measurable effects.
So what do you think then are some of the most important next steps as we try to push this field forward of moral emotions generally, but especially some of the varieties you've been talking about, awe and related feelings of admiration? What do we need to do next to really pinpoint them and understand them?
Yeah, well, I think the field's progressing really, really nicely. When I got into it, so I'm a miserable stock investor. I mean, almost every decision I made about when to buy and sell has been wrong, and I should have just done the opposite. But when it comes to academic areas, I just lucked out that I started grad school in '87, and I sort of put all my money on emotions, culture, morality, cultural psychology, positive psychology, and every bet has just done really well. But emotion research is linked to all those fields I just mentioned, and I think the field is just growing so nicely since the '90s. So for complex things like emotion, you want to not be locked into one discipline. You need to understand. I think we need a psychology which is even more phenomena-based rather than discipline-based. Robert Sternberg called for this a while ago. So, I love the fact that emotion is one of these premier areas, a kind of a convergence zone where you got people who aren't defined by, oh, I'm a social psychologist, or I'm a clinical psychologist. Like, oh, I study emotion. And that means, I know something about, emotional expressions in animals, and I know about the frontal insula and, the evolution of emotion. And so I think we've been approaching it from a multidisciplinary perspective for a long time, and I think it's really paying off. The methods tend to drive progress, and Paul Ekman's seminal research on facial expression was so important. And for a while, it kind of soaked up all the attention, those 6 emotions. I think for a while now, we've gotten beyond that, and people are looking at emotions that don't show up on the face. And that's the interesting thing about some of these positive emotions. Gratitude, there's no facial expression of gratitude. Admiration and awe, there's a little bit, sort of eyes widening maybe, but it's not really, the face is not the way into these emotions. I think looking beyond the major emotions and finding emotional states that are interesting. One thing I would especially encourage is for people to read, the article on the weirdest people in the world, how we Westerners, we're Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So, emotions don't vary radically across cultures. The radical, Benjamin Whorf idea doesn't seem to be true. But even still, you get emotions are related to our sense of self. And to the extent that the self varies across cultures, emotions vary to some extent. So I would encourage young researchers to read that article, be familiar with that article by Henrik and Heine and Noren Zion, the weirdest people in the world, and look at emotions across cultures as well. And I think the field's growing very nicely.
Fantastic. So the last question I want to ask you is a little bit about your work that you've been discussing lately and is widely read, including a book, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And here you discuss, the moral foundations of politics that's really grounded in recent discoveries in moral psychology. And I wondered if you could say not only sort of what are the main arguments in this book, but what role do you think moral emotions can play here? Yeah.
Sure. I'm happy to talk about that book in my sleep all day. The book really represents the playing out of all the things I started in grad school, the interest in morality and emotion, basically. Well, the book, I don't want to get didactic here, but I guess I do. The book there's 3 parts of the book, there's 3 principles, and each one is really about emotions to a large extent. So first third of the book is the basic idea is intuitions come first, strategic reasoning second. Now, when I was in grad school and in the 90s, I was always talking about moral emotion, how emotion drives reasoning. And then as I really tried to specify these emotions, I realized, well, it's not just emotion, it's just sort of intuitive processes in general, and not all intuitions are emotional. So I broadened my moral psychology out from its original focus on emotions like disgust and anger to intuitive processes more generally, and that is, of course, automatic versus controlled processes, basically. But the most dramatic cases of moral distortions and terrible reasoning are when you get emotions, when you're angry, when you're disgusted. You get all kinds of what is clearly crazy, terrible post hoc moral reasoning, and you see it in your opponents. You see, when somebody's angry at you, they make up some ridiculous argument. You can see through it in a second. So it's just really clear that the basic architecture of the mind is that we've got all these automatic processes, of which emotions are the most visible. And when those kick in, they're functional. They serve a purpose. The purpose is defending your reputation or criticizing or attacking someone. They harness or hijack or employ all your other faculties, especially your reasoning capacity. So that's what the first third of the book is about. Moral reasoning is not trustworthy. It is a servant of our moral intuition and emotion. The second third of the book is titled There's More to Morality Than Harm and Fairness. And this is from my time working with Richard Schwader at Chicago and working in India and across cultures, that we sort of Western, weird liberal types generally focus on harm and protecting victims. And that's an important part of morality, but there's so much more. And in looking at a broader moral domain, looking at issues of group loyalty, respect for authority, sanctity and purity, various notions of fairness that are not equality, all of them are attended by emotions. And so I think if we broaden what we see as the range of morality, we need to broaden what we see as the range of moral emotions. And so some emotions that support social order responses when you see somebody being disrespectful, um, um, for example, or emotions around group membership, loyalty, patriotism. All of these I would count as moral emotions. The third part of the book, the principle is morality binds and blinds. And the idea here is that we humans made this major transition from being basically individuals like other primates that are, Richard Dawkins works great for all the other primates, selfish gene, creating largely selfish individuals, except for reciprocity and things like that. Mm-hmm. But we humans developed this ability to create moral orders sometime in the last 500,000 years when we got symbolic culture and language. And so taking a very Durkheimian approach at how we bind ourselves together and experience some of our most cherished emotions. If you ask people, what are the greatest moments of your life? Typically, it's not going to be something you experienced alone, and it's often something you experience in a crowd, a triumph or some group experience. A fabulous book for emotion researchers is Barbara Ehrenreich's book, Dancing in the Streets, A History of Collective Joy, one of the best things I've read on collective emotion, certainly, and emotion in general. So that's all about this range of emotions that, it doesn't really show up in Ekman or, Darwin wrote a little about some of them, but these are these collective emotions that I think could be a new frontier. Social psychology used to be very social and groupish 100 years ago, and then it became very individualistic in the mid-20th century. So yeah, I think people interested in morality and emotion would do well to, read Durkheim, think about collective experiences, which we weird individualists are kind of weak on.
So, as you've talked about all these really important insights relating to moral emotions, spanning many different domains, I wonder what you think is in store for the future of this field.
Given how healthy it is, the safest prediction is just more of the same, just going.
Yeah.
People used to think, oh, well, there will be an emotion spot in the brain. Now we know it's more complicated than that, and lots of different brain areas play different roles. So I think as my prediction is really just more of the same as people get better and better at being interdisciplinary scientists who know multiple methods and can look at emotion from multiple perspectives. We're not likely to discover new emotions that no poet has ever written about. That's not going to happen. Although the scientific community will turn its attention to emotions that haven't been studied. Mm-hmm. So more, you might call them specialty or boutique emotions, perhaps. I think we're ready to bring in more such emotions. And beyond that, I'm not sure whether genetics is really going to contribute much. I think that's sort of too far away. I think sort of psychology is the core discipline, all the different, clinical and social. Mm-hmm. And then below that, we've got neuroscience, and above that, we've got sociology. So that's sort of the central area. I think better integration among those are the major levels of analysis.
Thank you. And my final question for you is, so if you have students who come to you, I'm sure they've come to you many times asking for advice, who are thinking about embarking in this field, what do you usually tell them?
Right. Well, let's see. I guess I would say I haven't had new grad students a couple of years. I've been focusing on the book and moving to a business school. But the grad students I had who were very successful, like Sarah Aljo and Jesse Graham, Gary Sherman, all three basically sort of picked phenomena. Sarah did gratitude. She picked that as her specialty emotion and made great progress. So she had a new angle on it. It was a pretty new emotion, and then her emphasis was on relationships. So you want to bring something new to the table that allows you to see things that others haven't seen. So Sarah looked at gratitude not as like keeping track of debts and paying them back, but as building relationships. And that was very profitable, you might say, for her. Gary Sherman was interested in disgust and worked with me on disgust, and then got really interested in perception. And he learned a lot about perception, and he did some really amazing work looking at how disgust actually sharpens your vision. It makes you better at detecting dirt, things that are not perfectly white. So I know nothing about perception. This was entirely his idea. He learned up on it and brought in, a lot of classic perception research. Wow. So, pick an interesting emotion that's not overstudied, and then bring to it some new ability or perspective. It could be for another discipline. It could be some new method, something that will allow you to make a contribution relatively quickly.
Great. So I want to thank you so much for speaking with us today. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure, June. I love the topic, love the series. Thank you.
Great. So this concludes our Experts in Emotion interview with Dr. Jonathan Haidt from New York University's Stern School of Business. Thank you again for speaking.
My pleasure.
Great. So thanks so much.